good to have you back on our NS3 sessions. This session, we're going to talk about strategy and why is it so hard for marketing leaders and business leaders to set strategy. So my first question will be around that. Why do you
Yeah.
think setting a strategy feels so difficult for most founders and marketing leaders?
I think it's for, several reasons. I think the first reason is that often one doesn't exist. And
Yeah,
if one doesn't exist to start with, you almost don't know you need one. People talk a lot about strategy, but when you delve into it, it could be a document that's 5 years old, for example. It's not an actual living, breathing strategy document. So I think lack of knowledge and experience around what is an actual strategy document is a real hurdle. I think there's this almost misbelief that you should know. Well, not necessarily. If you've worked your way up in a marketing department, you may never have set strategy before. And I think if you're a business leader, marketing has changed so much over recent years. What worked 2, 5, 10 years ago is completely different to now. And as such, that business might not have kept up. So they may still be focusing on disjointed activities that aren't getting results. And often I think it's those disjointed activities that create this rather negative impression around marketing that doesn't work, or it's a poor use of budget, when often actually it's because there isn't a strategy. But if people don't realize that, how can they know they're missing one? So I think a lot of it is that there's not this real awareness of, right, before you get started, what do you want to achieve? What's the strategy? What's the messaging? Who are the personas? What's the challenges? What's the pain points? What's our campaign going to address? These conversations don't necessarily take place. And I think that's sometimes because there's a real disconnect between marketing being a siloed department, when really a commercial department should sit as one, and the marketing lead should sit with the sales lead, or and the CEO or the MD, and actually sit and talk about what are those commercial goals. And I don't think those conversations happen. Well, certainly not as frequently as they
yeah.
should.
I can definitely agree. It's also, to me, it's the thing of being able to understand your audience and having a strategy in place that either pivots when the audience's preferences change, or having the right knowing what tactics or what actions to do or to implement when the audience effectively reacts negatively or positively to that strategy that you've set to begin with.
Yeah, and I think that even when I founded the business back in 2014, I founded it because marketing was so disjointed. I was dealing with quite big brands, and they'd have an agency for everything, but the
Yeah.
agencies didn't talk to each other. They weren't connected. It was all disjointed. And fast forward 11 and a half years since the business was founded, I'm not sure it's changed that much. You've got different messaging going out on different mediums,
Yeah.
not all pulling in the same direction. And I think a lot of that is because ultimately there's a lot of pressure, isn't there? There's a lot of pressure to get leads, a lot of pressure, for the activity to work. And I sometimes think that pressure and that almost fear of failing almost stops that ability to take a step back and think about, what activity are we actually doing? How is it joined up? What stage of the marketing and sales funnel is it at? How are we working with sales? What are the responses like? Is it working? Are we engaging with new people? How's our communities being built? And then how are we connecting with those communities on, say, email marketing and inviting them to our events and digital? So I
Yeah.
think there's a real disconnect in how marketing is, orchestrated. And I think some of that is because there isn't really a marketing plan as such. There's just
Yeah.
lots of different activity taking place, a bit like a checklist.
Yeah.
And I think that's very difficult for people to manage, but also very difficult to get results. And then that
100%.
feeds back into, this notion that marketing doesn't work. Well, it's not going to, unless there's, a really strong strategy and a really strong execution plan to get in front of the right people.
Yeah, and the strategy is often that clear direction of both the business and the marketing coming together to have a commercial direction. So why do
Yeah.
you think that a lot of marketing leaders, even I say business leaders as a whole, tend to struggle between that trade-off, or tend to struggle when making that trade-off?
The trade-off of having a
Trade-off to
strategy.
have a clear direction for their
Yeah.
strategy to know where to go.
Well, I think, often someone who's leading a business hasn't come from a marketing background. So they don't have that expertise. They're dependent
Yeah.
on the people they have around them to have that expertise. But, strategists like any skill, it has to be learnt. And just
Yeah.
because you may have a fantastic person delivering marketing who's really good at, hitting deadlines, making sure the messaging goes out, good at reporting, they may not have the experience or the expertise to put together a strategy. So I think often the person leading the business may not have the skills that they need around them to actually put the strategy, or say, we really do need to get this in place before we go any further. Because if you don't have a strategy, what I see happening all the time is marketing team gets pulled from pillar to post. They think they've got a
Yeah.
plan, but then something else will suddenly come in that's urgent, or a last minute event is booked, or sales are down over here, quick, we've got to rush over here. And what you often see is people just operating in panic, um, you know, and that kind of all feeds into itself, where then you might have the business leader just feeling so frustrated, thinking, well,
Yeah.
why is it not working? Why is it so difficult? So I think it's almost like a cycle where you need a strategy. The business leader may not know they need that, or what exactly is a strategy. It isn't just a list of activities. But then you've got
Yeah.
an over-resourced or stretched, or feeling under pressure team who also don't have the confidence to press pause because they're feeling under pressure. So I think it's like repetitive cycles that take place. And I think,
Yeah.
but ultimately, in answer to your question, I think, a business leader may not know they need one, and it's
That's
no
true.
different to any department. You need a sales strategy, you need a marketing strategy, both should be aligned. You need a R&D strategy. For any
Yeah.
business, you need strategies, but for some reason, marketing is often overlooked.
Yeah, I completely agree because a lot of times it is bringing those strategic goals from different departments to come together to add to that overall operational goal. So, from your experience, how have you found that leaders tend to have the distance between all of those goals coming together to drive the business in the correct commercial direction versus marketing having their own goals for like 2 to 200 leads, sales needing different goals to set, operations having different goals. How have you found that need to like actively come together?
Yeah, so I think it goes back to looking at businesses like from a 360-degree perspective, and seeing that all the parts of the puzzle is what makes the business. So when I
Yeah.
run brand strategy workshops, for example, that's got all the different business functions, and we're looking at the business as a whole. you know what's the strengths, what the weaknesses, what the opportunities, what the threats. Of course, we're looking at the value proposition, and we're looking at the customer base and the pains and challenges, but ultimately you're really looking at where the business is at. And if you don't have that holistic view, it's very difficult to then make sure all the pieces of the puzzle are working in the same direction. Because it's unlikely, if you don't have that holistic view, that you're starting from the viewpoint of the business is currently here, we need to get it to here. To get it from here to here is 5 new customers. We have a win rate on 10 to 1, therefore we need 50 leads. It's a high value sale, so it could take 12 months to close. Those kinds of conversations don't always take place, and then often they leave out whoever's responsible for the product or service. So factoring in the fact that there may be a product launch in there, or a new service, or you may have seen from a customer survey that actually this
Yeah.
particular part of the business isn't working very well. That alignment often doesn't take place, and marketing is seen almost as a necessary evil's the wrong word, but almost, we'll just get some emails out, just get some
Yeah.
posts up, rather than being
Also
an,
getting
an
people through the
intrinsic.
door, kind of just shove them in. No matter, it doesn't matter
Yeah,
who, just shove them
doesn't matter
in.
who, just get something. Whereas
Yeah.
actually, it needs to be part of that overall discussion. And if you've got distance from each function, it can be very hard to understand what the blockers are. So there may be a real disconnect between sales and marketing. The salespeople may see the marketing people as fluffy and a bit not commercially driven. Marketing people might see the salespeople as arrogant and lazy. There's all these
Yeah.
misconceptions that exist around functions, and actually understanding what those barriers might be is a really important part of fixing the problems, but also becoming much closer to the different departments and that alignment. Does that make
Yeah.
sense?
Yeah, 100%. Which kind of takes me on to my next question then. How do you think ego and internal politics get in the way of setting a real strategy and a strategy that actually drives the business forward?
Ooh, I love that. That's a great question. I think it's in the way a lot.
Yeah.
It's very difficult to say, I don't have the experience to do that. that's very hard to do. It can
Yeah.
feel, you can feel very vulnerable. You can feel that, you can lose your job or you can be replaced. Like it can be, it can be very difficult for people to be comfortable saying what
Yeah.
they can't do. And that's very understandable. And it can be hard for business leaders too. You know, Everyone's so busy saying what they do right, it's hard to pause and actually say, what are my weaknesses? Where I'm missing a trick. And in fact, when I did Cranfield's business growth program, that's one of the biggest lessons for me was actually I had a tendency to be focusing on what I was good at. And I needed to really run towards the stuff that I was naturally not good
Yeah.
at.
It's like doing the
Um,
hard things first in a way.
yeah, I guess so. In my instance, it's really knowing the numbers. I naturally want to go towards commercial growth, but actually, so I think I think ego and limitations play a big role in outcomes. And I think looping it back to strategy, I think it can be very difficult for someone to actually be able to say, we need some external help, or I can't do that, or what do you need? But
Yeah.
also, what I've noticed is because the person asking the question may not understand, how to put it together, that confuses it even more because all
Yeah.
they know is something's not working, please fix it. I just want it fixed.
Yeah.
They don't necessarily know how to fix it. And that often plays into this problem. And then people are less likely, even less likely to say they don't know how to do something if they're feeling that fear of, that pressure's mounting. So
Yeah.
yeah, I think ego and missing skill set plays a huge part in it for sure.
Definitely. Takes me on to my next question then. At what stage would a business leader or someone within a business know when they should bring someone in versus turn to an internal resource?
I guess it's really having open conversations. If you've got a lot of disjointed activity taking place, chances are you haven't got someone that knows how to create a strategy. So I think it's also looking at what activity is currently taking place in your organization. If you've got somebody who's heading up sales who's openly disparaging about marketing, you've got a problem with sales and marketing alignment. If you've got marketing going out the door, the proverbial door, so to speak,
Yeah.
which is surface, your marketing people probably don't understand your proposition fully enough. So I think there's lots of telltale signs that you can see if you press pause and actually look at what is actually happening. And that's hard to do when you're swept up in the day to day. There are so many demands, there are so many fires that need putting out. It can be hard to actually take that step back and think, you know, how is this performing? What is working? Where are the gaps? And that can be hard to do, but it's essential, especially in this climate.
100%. I couldn't agree more. Then my next question, going on to that, or going on from there, would be once that strategy is in place, but things still aren't quite working, or it almost seems like it's misfiring. At what point would a business leader know that it's either a strategic failure or it's actually the people implementing the strategy or the planning process being the problem?
Okay, so that's really interesting. I mean, making the assumption that the strategy to start with was the right strategy,
Yeah.
marketing tends to fail for three reasons. You're not targeting the right people, you've got the wrong messaging, got the right messaging, not going in front of the right people. It very rarely is there anything outside of that why marketing fails. If you've got the right messaging going in front of the right people with the right nurture flows and you're getting results and it's still not working, then it becomes due to sales and marketing misalignment. Marketing can only take things so far and then they
Yeah.
need to pass the baton to sales. And that baton passing is a critical part of things working. If you've got a good strategy, but key components aren't working, you go back to, is the messaging right? Are we reaching the right people? Have we got a proper plan to get their attention? And I think often the execution of marketing forgets the sales and marketing funnel, and
100%.
forgets that you've got to get their interest and then pull them
Yeah.
through into each stage. So I think the devil's in the detail, really, and it's just then checking each part of what you're doing and seeing where the holes are, because the devil is in the detail. It's actually going, okay, that's not working very well, let's fix that. Oh, that part needs to be stronger, and actually having the confidence to do that, I think, is really important.
Definitely. One of the things I've always noticed is, for example, if someone closes a lead via Google Ads or organically online, how quick is that lead or how quick is that person responded to? Are they contacted in a way that's warm and
Mm.
appealing, or is it someone just going in for a hard sell straight away? So I'd say
Yeah,
that
that's
it's
so
part of the
true.
strategy that needs to be accounted for.
That's so true. And I think often that is one of the biggest problems is that, people forget that it's humans.
Absolutely.
I've got a lead, jump on them. Let's warm it up a little bit first,
Yeah.
and you see that when it comes to even trade shows, you've got people on a stand having personable human conversations and getting leads passed over to a sales team who then sends an in-your-face sales message and then will then potentially say they were the wrong leads, I didn't get a response. It's like, well, how hard did you work for that
Yeah.
response? And I think often people forget that if you're trying to get someone to buy from you, you've got to put a bit of effort in, and I
Even if they
think,
come to you, even if they're the ones coming to you.
yeah, and if you look at your example, someone's filled in a Google ad or you come through your organic search efforts or whatever it might be, that's the start of their journey. They may well have
Yeah.
done some research. They're definitely indicating they've got a need, but you don't know anything about them. So the
Yeah.
starting point has got to be starting at the beginning, asking the questions. Yet so many business would just fire off a sales email, rather than thinking about, hang on, what stage of the buyer journey is this person at?
Yeah. Absolutely. Which kind of way goes back to to the session we had last week, talking about a customer's lifetime value to the business and how how the company's strategy has to like account for that and definitively know where the person is in the buying journey and how long can they stay with the company to get as much value, how much value the company can give them versus the company can, the other way around.
Yeah. Well, yeah, exactly. Because also, and that's where I guess the questioning and the really listening comes in at all
Yeah,
stages, not just when you're first getting to know somebody, but checking in so you don't lose them. And then
indeed.
also that information is invaluable then to go back into marketing to shape authentic campaigns. And yeah, I think it can be so easy just to blitz through some of the, really important stages of the sale, which is what, makes it successful.
Exactly. Yeah. In that case, then how can leaders tell the difference between when they've got a plan that accounts for their sales process and their marketing process, and a strategy that accounts for all of that put together?
So I think strategy is looking at your overarching what you need to achieve and that real understanding of the sectors you're operating in, where the lower hanging fruit is, how you're really going to get the results you need. The plan is how you're going to make it happen. And I think keeping the two quite distinct is really
Yeah.
important. The first is the why and the how and the, how you're going to get there. The plan is delivery. So I think, and that's where KPIs are so important, and those KPIs then feed back into your strategy, and then you need to adapt the strategy. But also, if you're really measuring all parts of it, that's where you can more quickly identify areas that need to strengthen. For example, if you've got high MQLs, very low sales accepted leads, where's the disconnect happening? If you've got very low marketing qualified leads but high conversion, how can you get more of them? I think really reading the
Yeah.
numbers is really important, and then feeding that back into the strategy document and seeing it as a ever evolving piece of
Yeah.
work.
Absolutely. And I would also say having an internal audit, whether if it's per quarter or at least every 6 months. That way you need to know what's working well to amplify it. If something's not working as much as you just said, work will make it to go, how can we improve it to be better? If not, replace it with something else that can actively deliver value. But yeah.
Yeah, and I guess this is where people owning what isn't working is so important, and it being okay to say that, because obviously it takes a lot to find the right mechanism. Otherwise,
Yeah.
we wouldn't have
Everyone
having
will be
these
rich.
conversations.
Yeah.
um, and so I think actually, having the confidence to say, what was the best thing we did this quarter? What was the worst? What can we learn from the worst? What can we learn from the best? How do we adapt? How do we strengthen without people feeling they're being pointed at or, they're being criticised, feeling like it's a healthy part of that review process. It's hard to get right because people are naturally defensive, but,
Yeah.
it's an important part of that process. And that then in turn encourages more creativity, encourages, better campaigns. It stops it being the same as everyone else if there's that confidence to try new things, which I think is really important.
I couldn't agree more. So my last question is, it's quite a big one, but what's the one thing that every founder or marketing leader should stop doing and should stop doing to have a clear strategy?
Gosh, the one thing you do like to hit me with it. I guess it's really, really understanding where you're trying to get to.
Yeah,
Really understanding that to start with. You can't write a strategy unless you know what your end destination is. And I think it's got to start, where do you want to get to? And then you can work your way back.
yeah,
But I think knowing what the end destination is really, really important at the start of before you start anything.
definitely. I'd also say to be able to communicate that to both your C-suite as well as your entire team, because if everyone isn't pulling in the same direction to have the same goals or to align their goals accordingly, it will be a very, very hard hill to climb.
Yeah, I mean, knowing your destination is just a start. You've then got to work out how to get there, how to get everyone empowered, how to get everyone on board. Like you say, making sure that's communicated really clearly. But I do think that tying people down to say, what do you need this to achieve,
Yeah,
is really, really important.
absolutely. Well, that was everything for our second session. Thank you
Wow,
for
thank you.
thank you for coming. Next week we'll be going over the reasons why marketing fails, and yeah, looking forward to it.
Me too. Thank you so much.
Thanks. Talk to you soon.